non-readers. You should read more. It's a lot of fun.
Reading is fun.
Reading is
it's fundamental.
It is. Take a look. It's in a book.
But don't just take my word for it.
Hey everybody, welcome to Crossover Event. We are back, and this time we are higher than ever. Oh wait, no.
Wait, what?
That's not how I meant.
I missed the pregame.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No. What, because we're talking about epic fantasy, which of course is also been referred to as high fantasy, which I just assume that's because most of the people who really liked it in the 70s were so freaking high.
You know they had to be.
Yeah,
I mean, when Zeppelin wrote multiple songs about Lord of the Rings, they were so high. And Lord of the Rings, of course, obviously is a topic on everybody's lips right now because Amazon finally has put out their most expensive television production in history.
Isn't this the most expensive production?
It is the most expensive.
And I tell you what, man, you watch that thing and it shows.
Yeah, no, I mean, their Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, which takes place in the Second Age. Note, the movies and The Hobbit take place in the Third Age. Mm-hmm. So it cost them $250 million just to get the rights to do it. And that doesn't even include the big stuff. Like, they don't have rights to anything in the Silmarillion, right?
What?
Yeah, they have rights to the appendices and to the other side books he wrote around it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but anything that's not in those but in the Silmarillion, they can't touch. That's like, I know.
Wait, so no Tom Bombadil?
No, thank God. We're never going to see the origin story of Tom Bombadil.
I'm so curious, though. I want to know.
But I am Chris from oneofus.net, and joining me is...
I'm Martin Thomas, who you'll usually see on Double Toasted.
And I'm Matt. I do all the production here on camera for the second time.
He's usually behind the scenes.
Yeah, he's that producer that we're always referring to in the back.
True fans will recognize me from that one other extras I did. What was it? 80s sequels.
Oh,
is that in?
yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
I was reading them all. I wasn't really engaging. I was just reading off your phone. I don't really remember. This was a while ago.
Well, Matt was content to just stay behind the camera until we mentioned we were going to talk about high fantasy. And he was like, ooh, can I get in?
He's like, I'm high right now.
That's a slight exaggeration.
Only a little high. But, yeah, I mean, we started watching Lord of the Rings, and I'm a huge dork for Lord of the Rings. Like, I read the books growing up. My first books I ever read were high fantasy, Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis.
Very good series.
I learned to read by sitting on my mom's lap and her reading those to me and running her finger along the book as she was reading.
That's adorable.
And by comparison, my introduction was watching The Hobbit on television, the cartoon.
There you go. But I thought Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies were, they're obviously the high watermark for high fantasy.
Sure,
nobody's ever done it as good as that.
Sure.
That's just, nothing even comes close,
right?
Quite frankly. Whereas The Hobbit, not as much. But still, that's the sophomore album.
I really do like that first Hobbit movie.
The first one's okay, yeah.
And there's a fan cut that takes all three movies and condenses it down to about 90 minutes.
I need to see that.
Yeah, I can send it. I just have the file. I can send it to you.
No, that's perfect.
That actually sounds about like what it should have been in the first.
Because
exactly.
Getting to the end of the second movie and they don't just kill off Smaug and be done with it. I was like, are you kidding me?
It's like, wait, where's he going? What's
Come
happening?
back. We got to finish the movie. Smaug! God damn it.
So one thing a lot of people don't realize is there actually is a real difference between epic or high fantasy and the rest of it. And like, wait, that's not the same thing as just fantasy? Well, there's actually different classifications, which will not surprise you at all if you've ever been to any sort of literary conference, because, boy, they've got classifications for everything.
Okay, Brainiac. Not everybody's been to a literary conference.
Well, I mean, it was a sci-fi and fantasy literary conference, but still.
Did they get into sword fights over what was high fantasy and what was just fantasy?
Are you kidding? They could barely get up off their chairs without breathing heavy.
Well, but this does spark a debate, something maybe we can clear up for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many things you think, okay, well, that's a fantasy movie. There's swords and there's dragons.
Sure.
And you would say, not necessarily.
Right. No, I know the difference for sure. But
Do
why
you?
don't you tell them?
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly.
cleared up for everyone else.
Yeah. Let them know.
So, I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that are generally benchmarked as epic fantasy, like the innocent person who doesn't have any power and is very vulnerable at the beginning, slowly either finding out they have a birthright or finding a magical item or whatever, and
Hero's
slowly
journey.
the hero's coming into power and awareness. I mean, that tends to be a staple in these type things. But it's not necessarily that way. Like Game of Thrones, which is decidedly epic fantasy.
Okay.
That is not that story.
Right.
Whatsoever.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
But one of the defining things is that it doesn't take place in anything that could be our world. Right. Now, they can have an alternate Earth, like, for instance, a lot of mythology, like Beowulf, would be epic fantasy, because clearly that shit didn't happen. There's no Grendel, there's no giant monsters, nobody's got magic powers.
It seems like there's always some historian that could say, like, well, this story was really derived from this thing.
Sure. I mean,
if you take like realistic events and try to like apply fantasy to it.
Like King Arthur, you're like, okay, that didn't really happen like at all, like was said. It's possible that Arthur was based on a real king. We literally don't know if it was or not, but there's been no end of scholarly treatises trying to say, yes, I think he's based on this thing in this period. But there was no magical sword, there was no wizards, there's no...
So this brings up something you and I talked about before, where, King Arthur clearly, made up, and it's all myth, and there's a wizard, and everybody, there's armor and there's swords and it's fighting, and it's you start with a young boy king who grows up and then has to fight a great evil. So what separates that from the Northmen? Because the Northmen, that is a made up character.
Sure. But the Northman is entirely plausible because the fantasy sequences in there may not actually be happening.
True. Okay.
And it makes that clear as you're watching. Like, we're not sure that those magical experiences happening really are real, or if it's just his perception of things based on his beliefs.
If it's his own fantasy.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Exactly. But most importantly, really, for epic fantasy, the stakes have to be the world.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's kind of the big thing. It has to be like, this is something that's going to destroy or permanently change everything. It can't be, me and this dude are going to break into this dungeon and steal all the gold. So most Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, unless you're like 35th level.
Right. Well, you eventually get there.
Yeah, when you're fighting God. Queen of the Demon Web Pits or something, maybe. Yeah, sure. But
okay, now this brings up a question. And I saw this while I was looking this up. Harry Potter, where does that fall?
I would say Harry Potter counts, but I've seen arguments that it doesn't, because they're like, well, it does exist inside our world, but it doesn't. But it's like this whole add-on where our world exists, but here's this whole other world that's like behind
within
it,
the world.
underneath it. I'm like, I would definitely say,
and
that hits all those hallmarks. It's always a shit, everything is going to be ruined. Like all humans will die or be imprisoned if the bad guys win. Boy person coming into power. Yeah, it hits all the stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. But that's basically the difference there. So, not that anyone is ever going to have a real argument with you about it, because honestly, who gives a shit? But we're here to talk about some of our favorites.
The wrong people do.
And I found that outside of Lord of the Rings, for movies and TV shows, the ground is kind of thin for truly great epic fantasy.
There's a lot of good. There's not a lot of great.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Now, do you think that's just because it's hard to sell it to an audience, or because it requires really a lot of money to make it right?
I would think a bit of both.
Yeah. So would I. And you would think after Lord of the Rings, the massive success of that film series, there would have been more efforts to adapt other really beloved, of which there are many, book series that are out there. And I think that's why our focus might be more this week on actual book series.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a big push for sword and sorcery movies. And we were talking about them earlier, the Sword and the Sorcerer, Krull, Beastmaster, Excalibur.
Conan.
Conan.
Yeah.
But if you were on basic cable at night, you'd see all kinds of movies that, you've never heard of again. But there was a flood of them.
Yeah, because they were, back then, audience expectations were different, let's face it.
Oh,
so a lot of those were like dudes in the desert.
Yeah.
And the same place they would shoot like westerns, like back in the day. He's in New Mexico somewhere, and there's like, if it's a magic item, it's not particularly sparkly. Anyway, back to high fantasy. We're going to talk about some of our favorite picks, and Matt is our guest this week. We'll let him say
we'll put you on the hot seat first.
So it's funny that earlier you had mentioned about books getting turned into series that and my first pick is the Sword of Shannara, which is a
Terry
very by
Pratchett?
Terry Brooks.
Not Pratchett, Terry
No,
Brooks.
Brooks.
Different high fantasy
Different
writer.
Terry. But there is a MTV series that it got turned into that I haven't watched because I've heard it's, I don't want to say garbage.
I got
but,
2 episodes in and went, nope.
Yeah.
Wait, what's it called again?
The Sword of Shannara.
Sword of Shannara.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it is very much a ripoff is harsh, but it is very much heavily influenced by Lord of the Rings. It's the story of like this kid who grows up. He's a half elf, and then turns out he's the chosen one, and he has to go and fight the evil king and the evil Skull Lord. And it's a journey through this whole world, and it's very exciting. But if you hit a lot of the same story beats where, they're traveling together, but then something happens and the party has to split up and they each go their own separate ways and they meet new people along the way and then they group together and then eventually everyone comes back together and they defeat the evil guy at the end of the book. And it's not original in terms of its plot, but it's really fun. I like the world a lot. It has a lot of very interesting elements, and they have a really interesting magic system and magic is not super prevalent. It's very Gandalfian is a word that I just made up that I enjoy.
You're like Shakespeare.
Right, yeah. There's the one guy who can do magic, and they hint at, like, every time he does magic, he ages a little bit. And it's just, and they hint at a lot of these little things here and there. And it's just a fun series, and there's dozens of these books now over this whole thing.
I remember when I was a kid, they were coming out, and I read the first couple and really liked them, and that was all there was at that point. And now there's so many of them.
There's a bunch, and then I realize as I'm talking, I might be sort of breaching the definition of epic fantasy, because it is in our world, as we eventually find out later. It's just
but at first you don't know.
At first you don't know.
The magic guy's like, "You damn dirty apes! You blew it up!"
They find the Statue of Liberty, and
Well, I could say just from what you're telling me already is that I like the fact that magic has rules and consequences. Because
there's
it's so
very
often
clear
in so many things where, and maybe it's not in high fantasy stuff, but so much in movies and TV shows, magic is introduced and it's really there just to provide plot armor.
It's a problem solver.
Yeah, it's a problem solver. It can I can do whatever I did because magic.
Yeah, we can fix this plot issue because we'll just come up with some spell that they found a scroll for that fixes it. Yeah. I always like the punishments as well, but I like it where it's more like a monkey's paw situation. Like if you go into it too casually and don't know exactly what you're doing, you can be the one who causes the problem to become much, much worse.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of magic in the Sword of Shannara, which again I really like. There's some like remote viewing kind of things where it's just like, clairvoyance but there's also some like burning fire spells and things like that. But for the most part, it is a really solid series. Highly recommend. There's Sword of Shannara, Elfstones of Shannara, Wish Song of Shannara, and then the Voyage of Gerald Shannara.
Isn't there a prequel series too?
Right, that's the Voyage of Gerald Shannara,
okay.
And then there's the whole there's a whole other series where they travel to this other island that's actually full of AI enhanced robots, which is again because we're in our world, and it gets a little off the rails at the end, but it is fun. I've read many of them, and highly recommend.
Yeah, they were, like I said, really one of, when I was in Lord of the Rings and Narnia and all that stuff growing up, that was one of those books that everybody else was reading as well.
Yeah, it's in that circle for sure.
Okay.
Martin?
So as we're speaking of books, as we've covered, it's hard to get a high fantasy TV series going because it requires so much money. That's why you have Game of Thrones and Rings of Power, and that's kind of
it. Yeah.
That's kind of it. I mean, I guess you had the Merlin show,
and there's Shadow and Bone on Netflix, which is actually pretty darn good.
Is it good?
I've heard it's
Okay,
good.
all right. And I've been recommended the Vinland Saga.
Oh, and The Witcher.
Oh, right.
Witcher.
Okay. I'm not that big on The Witcher myself.
No.
I enjoy watching it, but I just can't fall in love with it the way people do. I'm like, oh, this is fun, but it feels like more like Conan or something. The stakes don't feel very high. It's very episodic. It's like, then this week he fucks up this dude.
Well, with the first series, because they kept mixing the timeline, I was so like, okay, I thought I knew what was going on, and maybe I don't. And then I was like, all right, by the end, I was like, all right,
that's
I guess I get it. Because in the beginning, I thought, this is terrible. This is like almost laughably terrible. And then I was like, okay, I'm kind of into it. Oh, wait, the timeline is mixed. I don't know what's going on. Second season, first couple episodes, I'm like, all right, I am here. And then by the third episode, I'm like, I don't know what the fuck is going on.
You're like, man, you're making Westworld look comprehensible.
Westworld.
So I would jump to a book also called, and this is a recent book. It's The Black Tongue Thief. And it's written by Christopher Buehlman. And Christopher Buehlman, first off, he's a performer. He is known in the Renaissance Festival circuit for playing the character of Christoph the Insulter. But he's very much a stage performer who has written several novels. And he is a really great writer. The Black Tongue Thief is his most recent book. And it's the one I started with. I've gone back and read a bunch of his other books. He's really great at writing, except a lot of times when he gets to the ending, I'm like, But this book, it's pure fantasy. And it's probably my favorite. And it's definitely my favorite. And it's all about, the Black Tongue Thief is a thief who... He has come from a takers guild, as they call it, where they teach them thievery and lockpicking and disguise and all types of things. And there's so much that's relatable to it because he's graduated from the guild. He's out there to make his money. He's got like student loans he has to pay back, like for all this knowledge. The way this world works, you got to pay back and give back to them, and you get your. It's almost like I remember this from school. You go back to where they have an employment center where you're like, well, these are jobs you can get that can help you get money and pay us back. And one is to assassinate this female warrior, where she's all like,
he's like, I'm a thief.
Yeah,
I don't do assassinating.
And they were like, well, we taught you some things. You can do it if you really want to.
I took a minor in assassination.
Be that as it may. It was
just a credit that I needed.
Seriously.
Be that as it may. You got to get out there and do this job.
I can't even pronounce garrot. Is it garrot? Garrot? I don't know.
This warrior Galva, in unsuccessfully trying to assassinate her, she's like, you're pathetic, but come along with me because I'm on a much bigger quest, and you can tag along.
We don't have a thief
You will
class.
be of some use.
We got a wizard.
You'll
we
be
got
of
a
some
healer.
use. And he's like, well, maybe along the way I can figure out how to get her, but and him being where he is, he's of a pretty low station. So you're starting out with somebody who's almost kind of Weasley, but he rises to the occasion, and they have these great adventures where they get with pirates, and he falls in love, and they're off to, and there's giants and all types of mythological creatures they have to deal with. And by the time it gets to the end, it's actually very emotional, and I'm not usually one for wanting book series so much, because a lot of times somebody writes one great novel in a series, and the second one is always kind of like, well, that was there.
That's Shannara.
And they figure it out by the third one. That gets better. But this one has only had the one book. And the funny thing is, I jumped on this book just from the cover. I just saw the art on the cover. It was recommended by a guy who I know is really into Conan. And he threw this up and he wrote a blurb on it. But, people like things. They write blurbs. Who knows?
Sure.
But just look at the cover. I was like, this looks kind of cool. I'm just going to try it out. And man, it's one of my favorite novels.
Well, that's awesome. You have to loan it to me. It sounds fun.
Oh,
What's it called again?
The Black Tongue Thief.
Because there's another series that sounds very similar called The Way of Shadow by Brent Weeks, I think, something like that. And for a minute, I thought we were talking about the same thing.
Okay.
But you might like it. I mean, based on what I remember, because it's been a while, but it's been sitting on my shelf for a while, and the spine is mangled. So clearly I enjoyed it.
Hey, look, if you get nothing out of these shows we do, it should be recommendations.
If you like, thief assassin tales are not generally high fantasy, but another one that reminded me of Stephen Bruce's Jerrig series, which follows a young assassin around who takes assassin jobs for money, but he only kills bad people. Okay,
yeah,
the
assassins that only kill bad people.
Starts.
And he's got like a Lockheed. Like the dragon, in X-Men, he's got like one of those that's like he's psychically connected with that helps him, and they're kind of like comedy fantasy in a way, but
Okay.
like
Oh.
light comedy.
Oh, that sounds
But
good.
then the writer ended up getting a just vicious divorce with his wife, and so suddenly the series, like about book 8, turns incredibly misogynist.
Oh,
and,
no.
and you're like, oh no, what has happened? Like literally, there's whole books that nothing happens except him bitching about his like his ex.
Oh, no.
You're like, what the hell is this?
That's so bad.
I know.
Oh,
it's
wow.
hilarious.
Okay.
Yeah.
So only read the first 7 books.
Yeah, or so. I don't. They're really fun at first. Anyway, I'm going to pick my second favorite fantasy series of all time, and it's not Narnia, and it's not Harry Potter. I mean, Lord of the Rings is going to be number one because, like I said, that bar is so high, it's ridiculous.
Right.
You know, maybe that's why there's not a lot of fantasy because people look at that. Thanks a lot, Peter Jackson.
Yeah, you're like, I can't do
Like,
that.
wow.
I'm sorry.
Why even bother trying?
Yeah, that was a huge, enormous gamble by that movie studio to spend all that money on that series, having no idea if audiences would respond, since they never really have.
You
That
think
sort of
he
thing.
just came in with a great pitch and it ended with like, and I'm going to do it in New Zealand.
Yeah.
I got my own crew, and it'll cost you half as much as you
And
think
this
it will.
also by a director who never had a monster hit of a film.
Right,
You know,
right.
he'd had films that were very cult successful, but
Sure.
like The Frighteners and Heavenly Creatures and Meet the Feebles and what
Mhm.
have you, but never one that was considered a hit.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow. And boy, that was a gamble that paid off. But anyway, my second favorite is a series by a more sci-fi, better known for his sci-fi than fantasy author, Roger Zelazny, who's actually good friends with Philip K. Dick. They wrote a book together, in fact, at one point. But his stuff was not very Dickensian.
Okay. Wow, another use for that,
Yeah, I know, you can use
that
it.
word. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Also referring to a writer, or someone who's an asshole. The Chronicles of Amber is one of the few really epic, really huge and popular fantasy series that in no way owes anything to Tolkien. It is just not even, there's no orcs or anything like that. Like there's magic, but it's not magic in the way that it is in, like spell slingers. It follows this royal family that live in the one true dimension. Every other dimension, including our Earth, is just a shadow cast by the power of the one real dimension. And every possible alternative Earth exists. Like anything you can imagine, any parallel Earth exists. But the only people who can go to these other Earths are this royal family who have inherent in their blood the ability to travel by just walking or driving. They just picture things changing bit by bit until they get to the exact type of world they're looking for.
That's cool.
And our Earth is a popular destination for them. They all like our Earth. So they hang out here a lot too. But they're, also they'll be in fantasy worlds doing stuff sometimes. They'll be
We got
like
fried
really,
chicken wings on our Earth.
Exactly. We're the only dimension with fried chicken wings, which is weird. I don't know how that happened. But they also all don't like each other very much. And it starts with a murder, with like the king being murdered. And they're like, one of us did it. One of us killed him. And so the main character is sort of like kind of playing a private dick type thing. And nobody really likes him that much. He's a very John Constantine-ish. He spends most of his time on our Earth, like smoking cigarettes and hooking up with chicks and stuff. But he's like, okay, well, I'm going to solve this. And there are all these neat little details. Like they have tarot cards with their pictures on, and they can talk to each other through the cards and even reach through and go to where their other person is, which is how the king was killed. They literally stabbed him through his card.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It's the worst kind of scam call you can get.
So it's really, really interesting. It's like a mystery fantasy with elements of science fiction, with comedic elements. It's so good. And they've come so close to adapting it a number of times. I still think this would be, just by the nature of the setup, would be one of the coolest, most original television series.
Sounds like it.
Right? You could do almost anything you wanted with this whole thing. There's 10 original books. There's like the original series following the main character, and then there's a sequel series that was published years later about his son that came out. And now, after Zelazny died, somebody else got the rights and wrote like 4 books about something. I never read them. I heard they weren't very good. But anyway, so those 10 books you can buy in collections. They're really, really good. But oh my God, they're just, they're psychedelic and fascinating. Really, really, really recommend it. And you can probably find it cheap because it's been republished so many times. Yeah.
I will check. What was it? Amber
The
something?
Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny.
Okay. Yeah.
They were, I forget what company, one of the big, I think it was Prime. Yeah, it was Prime, was negotiated and paid for an option for it in 2017, but nothing's ever happened. So I guess because they were like, nope, sorry, that money's going to another high fantasy project.
Okay. All right.
Matt?
Oh, right, yeah. So I had initially thought I would do 2 book series, but at some point while we were talking, it dawned on me. So I was gonna, as a quick aside, I was gonna do Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, which is a fantastic series. There's only 3 of them, but they're each like, I think, 10,000 pages, something like that, give or take. They're very long. But
that is very long.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're probably closer to like 2,000. I'm joking, but they are very long books. They're very fun.
You can hold a 10,000 page book.
Very carefully. But it dawned on me that according to the definition we were looking at the start of the episode, Avatar: Last Airbender would totally count.
I would say it would.
Yeah.
Because it is a fantasy world that just happens to have like futuristic sci-fi soldiers showing up.
But I mean, like it's right. It is not our world. There is clearly high fantasy elements. The world is at stake, but it is easily one of my favorite shows or pieces of media just ever. I'm currently reading the first Avatar Kyoshi book, which I'm really enjoying.
I didn't even know there were books.
Yeah, there's 3 of, well, there's a bunch of graphic novels, but these are just like word novels. But there's 3 of them now. The first 2 follow Avatar Kyoshi, who is known for being more willing to murder if she needs to get her problem solved.
Okay.
Whereas, I mean, typically the Avatar is a very peacekeeping, but Kyoshi just like does not.
To be clear, you're talking about Airbender, not James Cameron.
Oh, yes. This is The Last Airbender, the Nickelodeon cartoon show.
Yeah.
But it's so good. We have Appa. He's over there. I won't get him. But it's just what started as a children's cartoon like quickly becomes like a really
very quickly.
Yeah, like a really emotional. Like there are moments that like I'm still stunned thinking about, and if you've seen the series, you probably know a couple of them off the top of your head.
I gotta say that it is one of those shows that, you know, for being on Nickelodeon for kids, I know way more adults who are into it than children. And as much as contentious as the internet is, it is maybe the one thing that everybody agree on.
Yes.
Except for people who got mad at the spin-off series, which for me was just as good.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what? I don't want a female lead character.
Oh,
Avatar
I have no problem with her being female. I don't think it's as good, but still, it is good.
I'm biased because I'm friends with the
of course.
who voiced her.
It's thematically, it's very different. Korra and Aang are just 2 very different avatars, but I think that's kind of the beauty of the show is that you can follow these characters and they're working on 2 television series or a movie or there's a bunch of new stuff coming out.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Netflix is doing one. But then there's someone
that's the
else.
live action one.
Right, there's a live action one, but then there's some other one, or maybe I'm confusing myself.
The stuff that's happening, the creators have bowed out.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
But they're still making it though, right?
Oh, I think it's still being made, but the creators who were working with them went like, we don't like what you guys are doing.
There was some creative differences I've heard, but fingers crossed. Again, I will go for anything Avatar.
I just want more animated Avatars. Make another series. Make a 1,000 years before series.
They've done really so much great stuff. I would hate for them to go like, hey, people demanded it. Let's get it out there and go, oh. Ew.
Yeah, if they had like a story to follow, I would be 100% for it. But then there's also the RPG series that got kickstarted and became like the biggest Kickstarter ever.
Oh wow!
It is a hugely popular series, and I could rail about it forever. But I'm gonna stop myself because I will unless you stop me.
Martin,
another book series that I've thoroughly enjoyed. I think I've read all to the last one. Is the Iron Druid series that's so good. That's with so you've read with Atticus, who's a druid, and I was like, does it count because it does mostly take place in our world?
Yeah, it's urban fantasy.
It's urban fantasy, but there is one of my favorite books where he goes to Asgard because he has to go and kill Thor, and it is a world where all the versions of Thor exist. As a matter of fact, Thor is a powerful god because of the Marvel Comics Thor, which has made the actual Thor more powerful. Because within this world, like, hey, if you have worshippers, as Thor does, you got more power than most. And a lot of it is him fighting vampires and goblins and all. But it's been a very enjoyable series all the way to the end. And normally, like I said, I'm not always down with series, but this one has kept me along. But the thing I want to pivot away from books is to talk about this new Image Comics series. And I think it's a mini series, but it's called Beware the Eye of Odin. And this deals with a Nordic prince who the kingdom will be in trouble and bad things will happen to him if he cannot go and recapture the Eye of Odin that has been stolen from them. And he's off on this journey, and he has a female best friend who's like, I want to go with you. And she believes she's a Valkyrie, even though nobody else does. And he has not really a mentor, but it's an older guy. You know, he's an older Norse warrior with the big walrus beard who has fought in previous wars, and he's got an arm missing. And in place of his arm, he has a chain that's connected to an anvil, and that he just swings around and takes things out with.
Who wrote this?
Man,
I thought it was a big name, right?
It actually isn't a big name. I wish I had those details. Normally, Matt would be over there
holding up a sign.
Yeah, looking stuff up and yelling at me.
Right.
All the things I can't remember.
All together.
You cut it all together. You show this. Beware the Eye of Odin. Yeah. But yeah, they go on this journey the whole time with the prince going like, I don't want you guys here, and they're like, no, we need to come along. And they get besieged right off the bat by cannibal trolls and a forest that's attacking them. And it's one of these and giants, and it's very much the sun's out. They can't hit us here. It's like, yeah, we're good, except sun's going down. So what are we gonna do? And they have to take refuge with the dwarves, who tell the prince, they're like, hey, can I see that sword you got? He's like, sure, this sword has served me well. And it's cursed.
Darn it.
Oh.
Yeah, it might help you, but no good is going to come from this.
So was Elric's, but it worked for him for a long time. Until it didn't.
Didn't it kind of like...
Yeah, it fucked him in the end. But,
wasn't he miserable the whole time?
No, he had a very unhappy life. But that's more Cuts Eternal Champion. They're never having a good time of it.
Wait. Beware the Eye of Odin. There's only 3 issues out now, and I think the 4th issue is maybe a month or 2 away, which might be the conclusion, but I highly recommend it. It was one of those books where I was like, well, who knows? And then just reading the first issue is like, oh man, this is good stuff.
So I'm going to finish this off, and I'll keep it short because we're running a little bit long, and I know we've been just talking largely about books this week. Sorry to you non-readers. You should read more. It's a lot of fun.
Reading is fun.
Reading is
it's fundamental.
It is. Take a look. It's in a book.
But don't just take my word for it.
Our extra special guest, Jody LaForge. Wait, that's not your name? Oh, sorry. There's another book series that is really highly regarded with fans of high fantasy. In fact, my father always used to say he thought it was the only thing that came close to Lord of the Rings, which was a series by Stephen Donaldson called The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. Oh. And it's a bizarre setup, a weird premise for a series where it starts in our world, and Thomas is a leper. He's got one bad eye, and he's missing 3 fingers on one hand that have fallen off, and he looks like shit. He looks terrible, right? Yeah. And he's really mad. He's just a very angry person because everyone avoids him, stays away from him. He's contemplating suicide, and he kind of, was it suicide or not, falls in front of a car, goes into a coma, wakes up in this fantasy world, right? Oh, okay. And everyone's like, oh my God, it's you. You're Barrack Halfhand, the prophecy one who would come back. And the thing is, his wedding ring, his wife and kids had just left him. He's still wearing his wedding ring, is white gold, and there is no white gold in this world. Okay. And white gold was in their myths and legend was associated with this guy, which is the most powerful magic. If you have that, you can wield magic that makes everybody else's magic look like cantrips, right? And he's like, what? This is dumb. Why am I dreaming this dumb fantasy shit? And there's this hot elf chick who's one of the first ones he meets, and he's like, man, if I'm going to dream, I'm going to have fun. So he just holds her down and has sex with her. Oh. And it's like, it's a dream, whatever, I'm going to just get off and maybe I'll wake up. And then he keeps not waking up. And everyone's like, yeah, that was a real dick move, dude. But we kind of need you to save the world. So we're going to let it go for now. And he's like, I don't want to, I just want to wake up. And so it goes through this the series slowly first coming to terms with the fact that, shit, this is real. I'm really here. And oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah.
Like, I really did that. Like, I didn't, the coming terms that there's even part of him, even in a dream, would do that intentionally. And it's a fascinating journey. Like, it's a hero's journey, but such a weird one.
No kidding.
As he slowly comes into his power, but at the same time, sort of gains a moral center.
Oh, wow.
And it's really great.
Have you talked about this before on the show?
I don't think so.
This feels, but it sounds so familiar, and I'm wondering if it would have been here or somewhere else, but I wonder. I don't know.
Maybe it came to you in a dream.
Oh, no!
You didn't break any elves, did you?
I don't think so.
Not this week.
Anyway, speaking of this week, that finishes this week's episode. Thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
See
Happy
him
to be here.
regularly on Bell of Lost Souls doing stuff, and I think you do Screen Fanatic stuff, too.
I do. Well, I do all of the video editing for Bell of Lost Souls and Screen Fanatic. I write on Bell of Lost Souls. I do all of our video game and board game coverage. I do a lot of things for this
You've
company.
done a few videos, though, too, right?
Oh, yeah. I do a lot of our board game how to plays, and I have one video on this channel all about Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh, wow. That's right. I forgot you're like a super fan.
Yeah,
Super
it's
fan.
pretty bad.
How did you spin it?
No, it's
Sonic.
oh, I get it.
Sorry.
I was just so excited. Oh, let me tell you.
I know.
I couldn't help myself. It was
fair
right
enough.
there. It's the dad joke
No, it
vibe
made
kicked
sense.
in.
It made sense.
Martin, of course, you can see him at Double Toasted.
Thank you.
Yeah, where he's there pretty much every week, right?
Oh yeah, 3 times a week.
And don't you all have another tour coming up?
We it's not so much a tour, but we are going to go back on the road for some shows, and we have a show coming up in Las Vegas on October 8th. Check out X1 Entertainment to get the details and get your tickets.
Yeah, and just
because
say,
October 8th is right around the corner.
be like, when are you guys going to tour with Crossover Event? And you can see me at oneofus.net, where we are going to do, after this, a very short bonus video where Martin and I will talk, because Matt hadn't seen it yet, exclusively in our spoiler discussion
I'm
of the
earmuff the whole time.
first 2 episodes of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, because we're both kind of burning up to tell you some things about it. So, also, remember, we have a podcast version of the show now, which you can find at belloflostsouls.net, or you can download it from any of, your Stitchers, your iTunes, I don't even know what
Yeah, we're everywhere.
Yeah, Spotify.
And if you're not, let me know and I'll put it on.
Yeah, leave a comment. We might very well respond to it in a video. We've done it before. We'll get around to it again.
Just ask something interesting.
Yeah.